happened to the woman of tomorrow? No, not Supergirl, but Superwoman. We're going to be looking at a character who actually came from the future to the past and then became Superwoman, and that is Kristen Welles. She has a bit of a unique trajectory in how she came to comics, and time for recording is a bit of a forgotten or sidelined character, at least in terms of her original iteration. There have been post-crisis versions, but it's not the same. I'm Sasha, this is Casually Comics, and we're going to explore just who was Kristen Welles the Superwoman. When it comes to Kristen Welles, her first appearance, as mentioned, was not inside of comics, but rather in a novel written by Elliot S Maggin. It was called Miracle Monday and published in 1981. It was promoted as a tie into the Christopher Reeve Superman movies at the time. There were two by the time this book came out, because Superman came out in 1978 and Superman 2 came out in 1980. This was the second novel by Elliot S Maggin of this series, the first being Last Son of Krypton. And despite the covers that are tied to the movies of the time, these books were not set in that universe. Instead, they were set inside of the comic universe, specifically in Earth 1 of that time, because what that means over time has also changed, but the pre-crisis Earth 1. You could follow them if you weren't into comics, but there were lots of details that would just pay off better if one was. And there is also the potential that based on the covers, some might have gone in expecting something that tied in a bit more to the movies, but there is also a likelihood that people who went to seek it out would have been familiar with the comics as well. How would you feel, or how did you feel if you went and picked this up? Now, while Kristen doesn't become Superwoman inside of this novel, it is still relevant because it shows the groundwork for who she is, and details from it are mentioned, and it's her starting point when she does come into the comics. It does even reference this novel. She's described at first as, Kristen Welles was intense. She was also with it, liberated and foxy, outrageously foxy. Kristen was all these things on purpose. Kristen loved disco dancing, and she ardently hoped that someday, against all odds, Sunny and Cher would get back together. She had her hair redone every month, the way the model on the cover of Cosmopolitan had hers, and she believed that the Equal Rights Amendment should be ratified immediately. She thought worrying about electoral politics was soporific, a drag, she corrected herself. She was indignant over, bummed out by, the exploitation of women in contemporary magazines, and she was extremely concerned with, into, the astrological signs of everyone she knew. Kristen is like this because she's studying to blend in, so that when she goes back in time, she should be able to immerse herself and be authentic. Now, she doesn't entirely fit in. She gets some of the slang wrong and things like that, but she manages to set herself up working for Lois Lane, typing up her novel. She's gone back to witness the first Miracle Monday, which is a holiday that they celebrate in the future, or for her the present, but nobody remembers exactly why. So she's there to track down the origin, to try and witness the first Miracle Monday. She ends up possessed by a demon, CW Saturn, who at first sought entry into the world through Lex Luthor, but wasn't able to actually take him over. I am Saturn, the voice from Kristen Welles said. I was born when the elements of Earth and Krypton were still cooling in the heat of a dying star. I will live on when your memory and time itself have no meaning. I've occupied your time, alien, these past weeks, and I will complicate your life until your precious Earth is a husk. Now, the demon makes Kristen commit all kinds of horrible acts, and one of these includes taking away Superman's ability to be Clark Kent. That's up there. We're not as up there as some of the other things, and Superman is just constantly chasing after this possessed Kristen, trying to stop all these things from happening. The demon's goal is to get Superman to kill the host, kill the vessel. But when Superman refuses to do so, it ends up because of, demon contracts and the like, putting CW Saturn under Superman's control. And so he's not only forced to grant him a wish, but also answer its questions, and so he's able to learn how to save Kristen, also that she's not from there. And in this way, Superman is able to save Kristen's life and restore his own. And so Kristen is able to learn that Miracle Monday is this kind of vestigial memory that people remember being saved by Superman, but they don't remember why, because it's largely been erased from their minds. At the end of the novel, two have a lengthy conversation together about life and the future, as much as she can tell Clark, that is. The reader learns that Kristen is the descendant of Jimmy Olsen, which is why she was treating him so shabbily inside of the novel, when she was just dodging him all the time or flirting with other people in front of him. It's because she's his descendant, and so she couldn't encourage that. No, I'm my own grandpa things happening here. Superman does also ask if he'll ever be friends with Lex again, which if you just care about Lex and Clark's friendship or are a Kleck shipper, well then this novel's got you in 1981.
Tell me something seriously, Chris.
Can't promise, it's against the rules, even for you.
Just one thing. Do I ever make friends with Luthor again?
She thought about how to tell him, and how much to tell him. He was Superman after all. She had to tell him something. Finally, she just whispered, someday. Mark Waid was quoted as saying that ending was his favorite of any Superman story in 2022. And Miracle Monday as a concept is even made into adaptations such as Superman and Lois. If you're interested, the author actually read this book on his podcast. It's called Elliot Makes Stuff Up. I'll link it down below. It's kind of cool because then you get to see where the emphasis in certain things is placed. Now, Kristen Welles as Superwoman would make her debut in 1983 in the DC Comics Presents Annual #2. All close up on her on the cover. There's no burying the lead. The story is The Last Secret Identity. It's a time-honored tradition for many of these Superwoman stories just have the most basic, succinct titles. You get the impression that the author liked the character a lot. Now, Kristen spent most of Miracle Monday possessed, so this story you get to see a lot more of her, and also it's told mostly from her perspective, or at least you spend the most time with her. This outing is drawn by Keith Pollard, with inks by Mike DiCarlo and colors by Jean D'Angelo. Kristen Welles is now a professor in the future, in the year 2862, a future that has a mix of your standard jumpsuits but also skimpy aerobics workout gear. She's teaching a lesson on Superwoman, who is said to be the hero with the last secret identity, and the class is having a debate as to whether or not she had powers, how is she accomplishing these feats. A lot of them veer towards the idea that she was just a person with tech. She is presented as an inspirational historical figure, known for some key words when she first appeared. She said, "Let history bear witness that no American ever had to bow to a tyrant." Words she spoke before the world even knew who she was, but words the world will never forget. The class really is mostly convinced that this was just an average person. However, when pressed about how she could have gotten the tech to do this, they suggest time travel, and they also suggest that their professor go back and learn the explanation, just like she did in the past, and that's where the editor's note to the novel comes in. The university could send her for for history. They do skip the tedious scene of her most likely securing funding and convincing them that it's worth going, and go right back to the past or the present for the reader. Here she sets herself up in the same position as an assistant for Lois Lane as a typist. She's able to do this because nobody recognizes her because she was erased from their memories in Miracle Monday. Everybody forgot who she was except for Clark. But what Kristen does in the office isn't type. Lois's book on the Daily Planet will be a classic someday. I typed up the whole thing before I came to the past, so that now I could pull the right pages of the finished work from my briefcase, which has stuff in it that Lois hasn't even written yet. That's not a good thing. Is Lois not supposed to notice the passages she didn't write? Kristen still has some of the things from the novel, like not using all the right slang. It's used like it was there as a bit of a throwaway joke, but that doesn't matter. She's on the case in Lois's office, and when she's in there, she finds that there's a Superwoman costume inside of the closet, and so assumes that it must be Lois Lane, which is a nice nod to the fact that in DC comic lore, Lois Lane was the first Superwoman all the way back in the Golden Age in the story Lois Lane, Superwoman. See? Succinct. Kristen gets the job with those extra pages that Lois doesn't mention, or extra sentences, lines, however much it was, and she's also once more hit on by Jimmy Olsen. He's just instantly into her and invites her to come to Morgan Edge's costume party, which based on how it's described later on is both bold and concerning.
What in the cosmos are you doing back in this century?
Would you believe sightseeing? And it looks as though I've got an escort. But let us leave for the moment this hushed reunion between two friends. My Superman is never hushed. So Kristen tells Clark why she's there, that she's studying Superwoman, who is meant to appear somewhere around this time and aid Superman in a battle against a coming villain, and that history makes it seem as if Superman knew who she was, so that's why she's there. Superman is set to face off against a great threat, King Cosmos, a tyrant from another time and possible future, who after being overthrown there is seeking out new worlds to conquer. And watching from the 20th floor of the Galaxy building, which is where they worked at the time, it'll be the lead story in Tomorrow's Planet that Superman made quick work of some spacey villain. But otherwise, I don't see your problem, Kristen. The problem is this costume. That great man out there is in more trouble than he's bargaining for, and he needs Superwoman. He needs the person who belongs in this costume. Well, if he needs the person who belongs in that costume, then he needs Clark's cousin, Linda Danvers. She's supposed to wear it to Edge's party when she comes in from Chicago tonight. But Linda Danvers, aka Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl, cannot be there to aid Superman at that moment because she's decided to see how the other half lives, as she puts it. So she's flying to Metropolis on a plane. She's just doing it for fun. There are some really fun moments in the battle between Superman and King Cosmos. Just in how Superman does a lot of the things that are fairly common for him in the Silver Age, but they're played with a slightly different tone, a bit more seriously, since this is the late Bronze Age. So there's a bit of a gravitas there, but it's still treated with a very fun attitude, and has this extra flair of drama. No, this isn't right. Superman was supposed to get help in his first encounter with King Cosmos.
Hi there.
Where did you disappear to? You scared me half to death.
I was lost in the 6th century, if you believe it. He shot me back into a time warp. I had no idea where I was until I found a pair of King Arthur's knights riding through the British countryside.
It's always gotta be people or a time period of note. Another running joke in this issue is that Jimmy really likes Kristen, but it looks like she's super into Clark because she's always dragging him off into secluded places. Lois, your new assistant Kristen, did I see her dragging Clark into the coat room? They're both grown-ups, Jimmy. Let them play. This is an office. Where's HR? Lois is a menace. She's encouraging questionable office romance with the woman she just hired that same day. Morgan Morgan Edge's anything goes parties are famous in gossip circles, which is why some have decided that the way to have fun and not be caught doing it is to come in costume. That sounds like some really terrible things probably happen at these parties. Morgan Edge is gonna get exposed. I mean, he will in comics later for being part of Intergang, but maybe for these parties as well. I do like that it gave Jimmy a chance to wear his Elastic Lad costume. Now, Kristen is put off because when Linda Danvers shows up, she's not in the costume. She's wearing something else. So she has to go confront Clark. So you really like the new girl, eh, Jimmy? I would if I could get to know her, but I think she has followed Clark into a dressing room. Kristen at this point is starting to get annoyed with Clark. She thinks he's just not telling her who Superwoman is. She's taking a while to realize what the reader already has, most likely because of the cover, which is that she is Superwoman. It's not until everybody else is knocked out and she's the only one left there standing, including Superman, he's down for the count, that she finally starts to realize what's going on based on the rules at play involving time travel and history. Set up inside the story, and they're fairly standard for most, which is that you can't just go back and change it, meaning she's there for a reason. It isn't Lois Lane, isn't Lana Lang, isn't even Kara with all her powers. I figured out who it isn't, and now I know who it is. I am Kristen Welles. I am Superwoman, and I have a job to do. This is the part where the time travel elements of the story may rankle some, in terms of the fact that it is a bit of a paradox, like how she goes out and says the famous words that she knows because she studied them before she ever said them, which are only part of history because she said them. However, if that isn't something that gets to you, then this could be a very fun, the mystery is solved, cathartic moment. Now she gets to jump into action. And she does just try to become Superwoman, but she has some difficulty. Where am I? What time does my next class meet? This feels like a falling dream, but this is better than waking up.
You're the only one missing from Morgan Edge's party, Professor Wells, as far as I can tell.
Side note, I just love this panel. Superman is drawn with such a graceful line to his body. It's like he's dancing in the air. And like her class surmised, she is able to do many of the same feats as Superman because of the technology that she has. She can do things like teleport, whereas he has to fly to where they're going. And she is able to use her historical knowledge of the battle to point him in the right direction, like where King Cosmos will be, which again, kind of paradoxy. They travel through time and manage to defeat him in the time barrier, where even though she overtakes Cosmos first, she leaves it to Superman. Nowhere, everywhere, without his navigator, he's tumbling out of control in the folds of time and space.
But why didn't you stop him? You caught up first.
Because I read about this battle when I was still in grade school, and history says that Superman, not Superwoman, first stopped King Cosmos.
First? You mean he'll be back?
Slipped up, ruined, timeline destroyed. The reason that historically looks like Superman knows who Superwoman isn't just because he does, but also because he manages to get an exclusive interview. Take that, Lois. And would it be a Kristen Welles story without her crushing Jimmy in some way? No, it wouldn't. Actually, it will be next time she appears, but we get one more crushing. Kristen, Please write me, Clark. I promise I'll never forget you. Clark, may I speak with you a moment?
Jimmy, I swear I didn't mean to, I just...
Bye-bye, Clarky.
I don't know what came over that girl to make her do that, Jimmy. She just assaulted me in my own office.
Sure, Clarky Poo. And I thought you were my friend. I'll see you again soon. And then Jimmy never spoke to Clark. He got over it. Also, Crisis is around the corner, so he'll just forget about it. Although Omniverse rules, maybe he remembers. The epilogue does have to fill the reader in on why she treated Jimmy like that, for those who didn't read the novel. So for those who did, it may be a bit repetitive, but it makes sense why it's there, because not everyone is going to have done that. Because not only is the first story in different format, but at first glance looks like a tie-in novel. Now, Kristen is a fairly fun Superwoman. She's keen without being naive, eager without being grating, knowledgeable without being arrogant or condescending, but also not the quickest on the social uptake, and a bit awkward and unintentionally rude. So she's got pros and cons. She's able to aid Superman, but she also needs help of her own, and she also still respects him. The story is set up in such a way that it's not a surprise that she's Superwoman, you're more going on the journey with her. It is a well-constructed, fun Superman story, and it sells the concept of the woman of tomorrow, and it leaves her open to have further adventures, which she does next in the DC Comics Presents Annual number 4, this in 1985. This one is written by the same author, but has art by Eduardo Barreto, inks by Jerry Ordway, colors are again by Gene D'Angelo. This one is Welcome to Luthorcon 3, and it's a different kind of outing. It's set up to be another adventure of Superwoman. Because of the wibbly-wobbly timey-wimey stuff, Kristen Welles is famous in her time for being Superwoman, even though she hasn't gone back and done lots of the adventures herself that she will be famous for, but that she knows she does because many of them are inside the history books. So she's living this kind of life where she's being thrown all these parades and things are being done in her honor for stuff she hasn't actually done yet. She was just a historian from the future on a time travel mission mission to determine the identity of Superwoman, but she found that it was she, Kristen Welles, whom history ruled would fly at the side of the legendary Superman. Now, this is very interesting for the character from a psychological point of view, and creates a situation where it makes it a bit difficult for her to live her life in the present because she knows she's meant to go back to the past. Also, it's just been a few years between issues, and look at how the fashion has changed. She's so much more punky now. The aerobics base is still there, but now there's also shoulder pads and fishnets and belts. It's more is more unless it comes to the fabric. Now she puts in an emergency request to travel back in time, because in the future you need visas to do so. And that leads us to our present day setup, which is that Superman has just saved the actor who plays him on TV and in movies in universe, Greg Reed. And he's going to fill in for him at the events he was meant to do that day because Greg's done that for him in the past. And what's Greg doing? He's meant to make an appearance as Superman at Luthorcon 3. It's a fan convention for Lex Luthor's villainy, and also other villains, but mostly Lex. So this comic is exploring some of the fan and con scene and cosplay culture that's emerging.
What are you guys, a brother? Wait a minute, you're a woman.
Good of you to notice. Like the hairdo. The entire con plot tracks for me. Also, that's a great femme prisoner Lex cosplay. Now, Kristen arrives in the past, but something went wrong with the transport, and so she doesn't remember all the elements of her life from the future, or even really who she is meant to be in the past, so she's just wandering around. But because of how she's dressed, some people tell her that she must be going to Luthorcon. There must be some reason that confused Kristen Welles thinks that she came to the waterfront as, "Hey lady, you look flaky weird. You should be going to Luthorcon. Come to Luthorcon 3, a celebration of villainy and the absurd." Sounds great. Also free admission for one day for costume people. Maybe this is why I came to this part of town. After all, I've already got the costume. Those kids were probably talking about what she was already wearing. Also, that one panel of her pulling out the costume is so covertly thirsty. This gets her into the Superwoman costume, and she spends most of the rest of the issue having these little vignette moments trying to remember who she is. She's also close to the action, but it also means that there are moments where she just moves from place to place because she gets a sense that she should. What is revealed is that Lex has set up a trap for Superman at this con by sneaking in real kryptonite, which is a feat because there was an entire storyline called Kryptonite No More, in of which the kryptonite on Earth was rendered inert, but they brought it back. It's been a while since Clark has dealt with it, and so it takes him down hard. He first feels it when he's reporting as Clark, but then later on he's going to have to confront it directly because he has to pull double duty at this event. He has to report on it as Clark for his work, but he also needs to sneak off and pretend to be Greg Reed pretending to be Superman for the events that he's featured in. This story is a bit more of a zany tone to it. It also takes some time to recap who Superwoman was in case one missed the other annual. And a lot of this issue is more lighthearted. There's lots of banter with the con goers, just more jokes overall than Annual 2, but it's still played more seriously than the Silver Age story would have been with many of these plot elements. So it has that same kind of energy as the first, it's just not quite as cohesive an outing. It feels more vignette-y. Superman ends up being taken out on stage with the kryptonite, and everyone just thinks it's part of the show. This is the best Luthorcon ever. And Kristen, like the last story, gets to be very useful.
Kristen, help me. Quickly, I need you.
Like last annual, the art in this one is very good, very dynamic. Superwoman slowly remembers more and more throughout this fight, and the evil plot is Lex is trying to expose Superman to kryptonite and get him to martyr himself so that he can then move Metropolis into a hostile dimension, more hostile than the current dimension. Luthorcon 4 is going to have some very big shoes to fill. This one had a real Luthor attack, but they do very easily defeat him. It speeds up a lot towards the end of the issue. This is a story made up of many fun individual moments, but it's again less cohesive overall. It's still a fun story though, and from a fandom perspective, the con is a really nice addition, especially because it's not mean-spirited. The bar is pretty low when it comes to fan depictions in fiction. Not outwardly hating us, hooray!
Terrific, you're getting your memory of the future back.
Slowly, little bits at a time. Only time will tell. That was a time pun. This time, the epilogue features her love interest, Barry, whom she left behind when she was lost in time, talking about her feats and her adventures, and maybe she'll be back someday. Because they all knew in the future that she'd lost her memories, and that she could only come back if she remembered, because then she'd remember how to do it. But it's a happy ending, because she returns, and they reunite, and she starts to tell him of some of the adventures that she went on, leaving the door open for many more Superwoman adventures that alas would never come, because the year was 1985, which means Crisis on Infinite Earths was looming, and that was when the DC Universe reset. There was an entire new timeline, multiverse was crushed, Superman had a very hard restart in terms of having a new status quo in history, and the late Bronze Age Superman would be no more, although Maggin's version would leave quite the imprint on many writers. As for Superwoman, this version would appear a few more times. She would make a very small cameo in Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. You see her on panel after everything is done, walking through the Fortress of Solitude next to Captain Marvel, aka Shazam. And Mark Waid, who has mentioned enjoyed the Miracle Monday novel, has her feature as a cameo in a Kingdom Come spin-off work, The Kingdom, Planet Krypton. She's one of the ghosts. It's also a bit of a full circle moment because Maggin would write the Kingdom Come novelization. But as for Kristen Welles Superwoman, that's where she is time of recording. Omniverse things aside, she hasn't really made an appearance again. Time of recording. However, another version of her did, post-Crisis, but pre-Infinite Crisis. This was Karsta War-Ul, who went by the alias Kristen Welles, and who debuted in Superman 668 in 2007. She was a Kryptonian soldier who stayed in space after the military council fell from power on Krypton and was replaced by the Science Council. The story where she debuted was The Third Kryptonian. It was written by Kurt Busiek, with art by Rick Leonardi, ink Stan Green, and there were a couple of colorists across the issues who I've put up on the screen. Also, there's a Chris Kent sighting in this story. Who else remembers Chris Kent? We only see Karsta briefly in the first issue and establishes that she's living on a farm and that her alias is Kristen Welles. They show you a K. Wells mailbox. This is a 3-part storyline and she's in each. She has a very different type of history. She was being hunted down in space by those angry about Kryptonian expansion because Krypton used to be an empire, hunted down by Amalak, who himself has had a comeback in the Power Girl series of the 2020s. And after many deaths, she went and hid out on Earth specifically because Superman was there and felt that if Amalak or anybody else found her, they would go to Superman first because he's the bigger threat. Stop right there, Superman. This blaster is designed for use on our kind, and I won't hesitate to use it.
I scan it. It is. I'm not here to fight, Miss Wells, just to talk. If you know my name, you know that too. I'm no threat to you.
This version of Kristen is ultimately inspired by Superman and ends up helping him defeat Amalak, and also ends up taking Amalak to the authorities, even though it means she could also be arrested because in her time in space, she did pirate things. Yo-ho. I'm cliff notesing this not because Karsta isn't interesting, but because she really is a different character. It's more of an in-name reference that fans of the Superman lore will recognize. As for the original Kristen Welles, historian from the future turned superhero, she's a fun concept, getting to live out her adventures in the time periods she was so fond of. Because of how she was set up, there was also the potential for many kinds of adventures that wouldn't have to disrupt the main canon of what was going on too much. And in her initial characterization, there's a balance struck with her, of maintaining that tension of her having prior knowledge without it being overpowering or annoying. Although mileage may vary. If one doesn't care for time travel at all, then it may just be grating. She's the kind of character though where if mishandled, there could be a balance tipped and she could probably quite easily become annoying. As for the time travel element, it's not odd for Superman. He used to hang out with people from the future all the time. For the brief time she appeared, she was a fun, well-rounded character. But those are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. Do you disagree entirely? Do you not care for Kristen Welles Superwoman at all? Had you heard of her before? Have you read Miracle Monday? If she hasn't returned yet time of recording, would you want her to, and how would you like to see her? What capacity? What would she do? Or do you just think it's silly? Too much time travel paradox? Too many super family characters at this point? Leave it alone. Your thoughts? I want to hear them. Please leave them down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time to spend discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.